So, welcome to the week of starting to sew. But just one last thing before we start sewing on our beautiful, beautiful A Side of Hearts quilt pattern. We need to start laying it out just to make sure that the pieces that we've cut, we're going to put in the correct spots that you're happy with. As I've said, I'm trying to get sort of a darker to light coming into the middle, as well as obviously our colour gradient going down the quilt, but totally up to you. But I just thought I'd show you putting it up on my design wall, which, by the way, is a really quick, easy, cheats way of having a design wall. It's hanging off a curtain rail. I'll put a little link to the little video that I made for it. Okay, so I'm just going through and using my labelled pieces, just starting to go through and putting them up on the wall just to make sure that I'm getting them all in the right spots. It looks okay. My colours are all okay. That I'm getting my colour gradients looking good. And you get to start to see it coming to life, which I just love. What was my next one? I realise some of these are going to be out of view for you, but hopefully you'll get the idea and get to see how good it's starting to look. So as you can see, we're starting to get our sort of colour gradients starting, and down this bottom end will be all the beautiful pinks and then into the purple, and my design wall is not long enough. So I might have to get back to the design guest bed to lay it all out. But you can see that here we're getting one colour and the second colour as making up the heart so that you get a bit of that colour movement and things. And the triangles for the HSTs are going to start to look good. So first of all, go and lay your pieces out, make sure that you've got them in all the right spots, and then we can get to some sewing. And this week we're going to start with the HSTs, the half square triangles. Before we go, one thing I forgot to talk about was the fact that our triangles, whilst looking beautiful and gorgeous, this edge, the hypotenuse, the diagonal cut, is actually on the bias of our fabric, and it is stretchy. So really try very carefully to not overhandle your triangles terribly much. Anything that you do on this side will actually stretch it and therefore make your HSTs a bit wonky and all the rest of it. So be very careful when you're handling those. I literally cut and put into my little piles and didn't touch them again until I started putting them up on the wall. So be a bit careful with them, and let's get to some sewing. So I've gone ahead and taken off one row or diagonal row of my HSTs off the design wall, making sure to keep the two sides of the HST triangles together. And as I talked about before, these are all bias edges, so I've got to be very, very careful. So I'm lining up that side, and as you can see, just sort of like my little fingernails sort of grabbing them. I'm going to keep the labels that I've got down here in the corner, just so that I can remember where this particular one goes. And then I'm going to grab my pins, and these are quite thin little pins, but I'm just going to pin top, bottom, middle, and a couple of ones in between, just so that this edge is going to stay very stable. It's not going to slip as I start to sew. And as I sew and put it through my sewing machine, I'm not going to push, I'm not going to pull. I'm just going to let the feed dogs take the fabric through. And I'm going to sew a very, very scant 1/4 inch. As we were talking about before, when we were cutting, we may not have got the exact full size of this square to create our triangles. So we're just going to make it a very scant 1/4 inch so that when we press them open, we can get the full size of the HST that we need. So I'm going to go and do my sewing, really, really scant 1/4 inch. So I've sewn my seam with a very scant 1/4 inch, and now I need to press them. And again, we need to be a little bit careful because, as I said, it's bias edges and it will get very stretchy easily. It's a little bit hard on this tiny little mat, but anyway. So I'm just going to fold back the darker side. In the pattern, I have specified that it's best to press the HSTs one way and then the next one in the diagonal part of your pattern to the other way. It's not crucial at all. That you can't really nest because your other one's going to be over. So if this is the corner, the other HST is going to be over there. So if you do have that seam that way and this seam on the next one going the other way, it will help a little bit, but it's not crucial. So don't stress too much about that one. And we're just going to very gently press this seam back. Trying to make sure there's no little puckers there. Just pull that up a little bit, get this corner as well. So here we have our pressed HST, half square triangle, and now we need to trim it. And as I said in the very beginning, having a big 12.5 inch ruler is going to be your best friend, because with a ruler this size, which is exactly what size we want our block to be, you can line up the diagonal line of your ruler and literally come and trim just the tiniest little bits off. So my block is pretty close indeed. So that's good. So that's one way, using the actual size ruler. Another way is using your cutting mat. I would double check that your cutting mat is actually correctly sized. Sometimes the lines are quite thick, so you're never quite sure that you're going to get your proper 12.5 inches. So maybe use one of your good rulers to measure that your mat is correct. And with that, you just need to line up one of your sides and then trim exactly to the size that you're wanting. Just being very careful that when you trim one side, you don't move your block as you then come around and trim the other sides. Another option is actually using a block lock ruler. Now I've managed to just get some quite large ones. This is a 9.5 inch, which obviously isn't the full size of our block, but it will give us the ability to do those corners really nicely. So with this, I would still utilize your cutting mat so that you're making sure that you're not cutting more than your block size. But this will allow you to, just bring that down a second, this will allow you to not only line up very nicely, because the block rulers have this indent on the diagonal, so it actually locks into your pressed seam, and we can then bring it right out to this very corner, and it will make us get a perfect 90-degree corner over there. Obviously measuring that we're getting to our 12.5 inches, but we could then come down to the other side and locking that seam in, get this other side corner as well. So that's an option. Probably not the easiest of options, but if you've got a nice large block, it could come in handy. My preferred, obviously, is the correct size ruler. Okay, once I'm sure that I've got all sides correctly and I've still got my diagonal working beautifully, I'm going to place my hand nice and firmly, cut the top. I'm right-handed, so I'm cutting those two sides. And then I'm going to turn my block around so the two cut sides are down here, which means I can then use not only the diagonal but the two flat sides of my ruler to perfectly line things up, and I can trim the last two sides. So there I have my perfectly trimmed HST. Now we need to do that for all of our HSTs. I would suggest taking them one at a time off your design wall bed floor so that you are putting it back in the absolute correct position, and then just head on through, make all of your HSTs and get them ready, and then next week we'll be making the hearts.